Welcome to the account configuration for Microsoft Azure. In this video, we will show you what you need to do in Microsoft Azure before you can configure an Azure account in PICCO and collect usage data and costs. PICCO can collect usage data and costs for individual subscriptions in Microsoft Azure. It needs to know the ID of the subscription in question and the offer on which it is based. Additionally, you need to create an application for PICCO in the Azure Active Directory and grant it access to your subscription. PICCO can collect utilization and analytics data from Microsoft Azure in addition to usage data and costs. In this case, the application requires additional permissions. Let us look at these steps in more detail. Log into the Microsoft Azure portal with your Microsoft credentials. Pick or specify your email address. Type your password, and sign in. Under Subscriptions, select the subscription for which you want to collect data in PICCO. Obtain the subscription ID for later use. Also retrieve the ID of the offer used to calculate the costs for the subscription. In order to create an application for PICCO, go to the Azure Active Directory. Go to App Registrations and select New Application Registration to add an application. Enter a name of your choice for the new application. Select Web App/API as the type. For the sign-on URL, specify the URL of PICCO. In the App Registrations, select your new application and display its properties. Obtain the application ID. This ID is also referred to as the client ID. Copy the ID for later use in PICCO. Select Keys, and create an authentication key for accessing the application. Specify a description for the key, and select the duration. Then, save it. The key is only visible at the time you create it. Copy it for later use in PICCO. Return to the settings for your application. Under Required Permissions, add the Windows Azure Service Management API as an application and set the delegated permissions as shown in the video. From the properties of the Azure Active Directory, retrieve the directory ID, as it is shown in the following sequence. The directory ID is the tenant ID, which you need later in PICCO. To grant the application access to the subscription, again select the subscription for which you want to collect data and costs in PICCO. Go to Access Control IAM and click Add to define new permissions. Select the reader role for the subscription. Select the application you want to grant access to the subscription as a member. The application cannot be seen in the list, but you can search for it. Select the application and save your settings. The application now has the reader role, which is required for PICCO to collect usage data and costs. In addition to usage data and costs, PICCO can collect utilization and analytics data from Microsoft Azure. For this purpose, your application requires the monitoring reader role for the subscription. In order to assign this role to the application, use the same procedure as for assigning the reader role. You have now finished the preparations in Microsoft Azure. The next step is to configure your account for Azure in PICCO. In PICCO, you create a new account for Microsoft Azure. and specify the following information. Specify the ID of the subscription for which usage data and costs are to be collected. Enter the ID of the offer, which is used to calculate the costs for the subscription. Define the tenant ID. This is the directory ID of your Active Directory in Microsoft Azure. Enter the client ID. This is the application ID of the application you created in Microsoft Azure. Specify the complete authentication key, which you generated for the application. Define the identifier of the culture, for which the data collected from Microsoft Azure are to be localized, for example, EN-US, or DE-DE. Enter the two-letter ISO code of the region, where the offer in Microsoft Azure was purchased, for example, US or DE. Next, you define the date, when the data collection from Microsoft Azure is to start. For the correct processing of tiered prices, the start date must be the beginning of a billing period. Information on billing periods can be found on the invoices from Microsoft. Specify whether utilization and analytics data is to be collected from Microsoft Azure in addition to usage data and costs. Be aware that this may generate costs in Azure, depending on the amount of metrics and data. After finishing the configuration, you can use the Check Account option to test whether access to Microsoft Azure is possible with the given data. Finally, add the account. Now, PICCO is ready to start collecting usage data and costs from Microsoft Azure. If you activated the corresponding option, utilization and analytics data is retrieved as well.